So good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Mastering GA4 Data Reporting, Essential Tips for Building Your Data Pipeline. We're thrilled to have you today with us. We have a very great lineup for today's session. So first, let's look at the agenda. So let's start. So within our agenda, we first start with a brief introduction where we'll give you some background on our organization and participants of today's session. Then we will dive into the GA4 user interface, covering an overview and its limitations, and possible solution for the challenges that you may face with GA4 reports. Following that, we will also explore the GA4 Data API and GA4 plus Google BigQuery integration. And finally, we'll also wrap up with our recommendations based on the insights and best practices as shared throughout the session. And before we dive in, please note that we do take questions at the end of the session if our time permits. So we do encourage you to ask your questions via the chat. You will also be asked to answer some poll questions during the course of the webinar. So you will please mind the pop-ups on your screen whilst they are going live. But first, I would like to quickly introduce us to you. We are InfoTrust, and InfoTrust, we are a privacy-centric digital analytics solution company that empowers marketers to make content data-driven decisions. We are working with the world's best-known brands, and so we partner with our enterprise organization in the CPG, retail, media, health, and finance spaces. We are also certified GMP and Google Cloud sales partners with offices spread across 3 continents to best serve our global partners. The growing team at InfoTrust, we are really committed to building the best-in-class workspace and impacting the communities around the world while accelerating the transition to the privacy-centric marketing. Talking about the team, that one who are going to be presented today, I will start first with myself. My name is Vika, and I am a lead analytics specialist at InfoTrust for mobile. I specialize in GA4 and app measurement overall. Fun fact about me, I speak 4 languages. I like to travel and haven't recently visited India. Today, I'm joined with 2 of my colleagues who will share their expertise as well. I will cover GA4 user interface, while Jared will delve into the GA4 Data API, and Trish, who is our Google BigQuery expert, will discuss Google BigQuery integration. Let me introduce Jared, who will give a quick intro. Over to you, Jared.
Awesome. Thank you, Vika. Yes, my name is Jared Fisher. I'm a lead digital analytics specialist focused on web. So I'm Vika's counterpart, but focused more on web specific tracking. So identifying ways to track web more easily, as well as defining best practices whenever it comes to organization as a whole. Fun fact about me is if I'm gone or if I'm out of office during the spring or the fall, it's likely that I am back home. I grew up on a farm, and so I enjoy going back there and driving some tractors and kind of getting my hands dirty with that. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Trish.
Hi guys, my name is Trish Thotkar. I am a senior advanced activation analyst here at InfoTrust. I mainly look into the BQ warehouse, and then also kind of more expert into the GA4 data schema. Fun fact about me, I'm just trying the frisbee golf now. So if you have any recommendations on what frisbees I should take, please let me know.
Thank you so much, team. So to kick things off, let's first delve into what makes GA4 such a game changer for the digital analytics. In a nutshell, GA4 was designed to track users seamlessly across multiple platforms, including websites and mobile apps. And because of this cross-platform tracking that GA4 can provide us, we can get an overview, like a comprehensive view of the user's behavior, regardless where they interact with your brand, whether they are on the app, on the mobile browser, or the website. One of the other standout features of GA4 is it has enhanced measurement capabilities. So it allows you automatically track the key interactions like a page view, scrolls, outbound clicks, site searches, video engagement, and file downloads without needing additional setup. This means you can get valuable insights out of the box for the website tracking straight away, just implementing the G tag or GA4 tag via GTM. GA4 also leverages machine learning to deliver AI powered insights. So these are predicted analytics, can forecast user actions such as purchase likelihood or site abandonment. So it kind of empowering you additionally to make informed data-driven decisions based off the insight that AI can provide you with. In addition to AI insights, GA4 also includes robust analysis tools such as a funnel analysis, path analysis, cohort analysis. These tools provide deeper insights into the user journey, behavior patterns, and also segment performance, and it helps you to identify opportunities for optimization in a more granular level. Furthermore, GA4 also allows you to create custom reports tailored to your specific business needs. So whether you need to have a detailed performance metric or customized KPIs tracking, GA4 is very flexible to ensure you can visualize the data in the way that matter most to you and your stakeholders. Now that we've explored some capabilities of GA4, it's also important to consider some cautions and challenges you may face while using GA4 interface. So I will ask Jared to go to another slide. So there are certain data collection limitations that you probably very aware of, but it's like really makes sense to call them out again. So when it comes to their data collection limitations, we have a limited number of events and user properties that we can create in the GA4 properties, whether it's a standard or GA4 360. For example, there is a cap of 50 custom metrics and dimensions for each of the GA4 standard property, while, as you may know, 125 custom dimensions and metric can be created in 360 properties. When it comes to custom product level dimensions or custom item level dimension, the cap is 10 for standard GA4, but it is 25 in GA4 360. The user property cap is 25 for standard and 100 for 360 properties. Additionally, there is a cap for number of conversions that you can create in GA4 standard, which is 30 and 50 in 360. And just to kind of keep in mind, when you are passing on the data to the GA4, specifically like event names and the values for those custom parameters, you also need to keep in mind that there is a limitation in the name, like in terms of the characters for the event name, which is 40 and 100 for event values. And user property has 25 characters long for user property name and 36 characters for the values. At the same time, if you are setting up the user IDs at your end, the limitation for the user IDs is up to 256 characters. So there's something to mind when you are actually starting creating the custom definitions in GA4. These limitations are very important to mind. Data sampling also might happen in the GA4 reports. It usually involves analyzing a subset of data to extract meaningful insights from a larger data sets. And it allows you to quicker retrieve the data with a minimal impact on overall data quality. And usually when Google is applying their sampling, it's because it attributes the need of data sampling due to the complexity of your analytics implementation and the data that you try, like a custom dimension that you kind of trying to curate at the same time. So curate complexity of data could be the reason why you have a sampling. Sometimes the use of view filters and combination of all those factors will contribute to the sampling. However, there are instances as well when using filtered views, segments, long time date frames, and custom reports may still impact in the low traffic site. Overall, sampling may occur if reports request more than the GA4 quarter limit. For standard and universal analytics, a different quarter. For a standard analytics, it's a 10 million events in the GA4, while for 360 is going to be 1 billion events. Another limitation of GA4 is a processing time. Standard GA4 typically requires up to 24 hours for intraday reporting, and sometimes even up to 48 hours for more complex features such as multi-channel funnel distribution modeling. Then we also have a cardinality that you might run into. So cardinality refers to the number of unique values that can be assigned to the dimensions. For example, like if you have let's say device dimension, you can only have this device dimension can only have 3 values, like a desktop, tablet, and mobile. Therefore, device dimension has, for example, the cardinality of 3. Some dimensions, like device, age, gender, have a fixed cardinality. But for, let's say we have other dimensions such as page path or screen class, landing page, or screen name or item ID, right? These dimensions we usually expect to have a high number of values. Hence, these dimensions are expected to have high cardinality. So overall, if there is a high cardinality dimension that you kind of try to pull in your data, you might see that any data that pass the permit limits will be grouped under the row other. So most probably if you're working with the GA4 reports already, you might see that row already. And usually what it means that, for example, if the limit of the table is 500 and you have 550 rows of data, then usually what is done is that the last 50 rows of data will be grouped under other. So this kind of explains how the other row is actually appears. Then we also have a thresholding. So GA4 by design has a feature that ensures that user's identity isn't revealed when you are viewing the data. So it prevents the possibility of identifying individual users by demographics or interest. And this thresholding occurs if the user count is low in a report. Easy way to spot if your data is thresholded is by checking the data quality indicator at the top of the report. That includes a message. I will not be able to remember and correctly tell you what the message is, but it will start with Google Analytics has applied thresholding and down the line. So this is kind of gives you kind of a heads ups and ideas whether the data is thresholded or not. GA4 UI quotients, while GA4 offers a really robust features within the UI. While using UI reports, you may run into some challenges. For instance, you might see that the enhanced reports filters are not that robust as you would want to. Let's say the match types of the filter, like regex rules. If you have your e-commerce site, you have an e-commerce site, obviously item dimensions would be something that you would like to filter, but unfortunately it's not yet available in GA4 UI. And the secondary dimensions differ from those in Universal Analytics, which means you cannot really filter by the secondary dimensions yet. So there is some limitations or like some cautions that you need to make to be aware of before actually diving into the GA4 UI. Additionally, we also have exploration reports in GA4 that are subject for some specific cautions, such as data retention period. So exploration reports are subject to the data retention settings that you set up in your configurations of the GA4 property. Usually by default, it's going to be like if you have a standard, it's a 14 months, but obviously like if you're 360, there is a possibility to increase it up to 50 months. And there is also another kind of caution that you need to make to be aware of is that exploration reports can display at a time maximum of 500 rows in a table. Now that we identified some of the challenges, how do we address them? Because obviously some of the challenges can be addressed within the UI straight away. For example, if you're talking about a custom event parameter and metrics count limitation that you could create per GA4 property, our main kind of basic recommendation is if you are 360, for example, client, and you have the limit of 125 parameters and metrics, our recommendation is to create only the definition for the metrics that are they're very important for you to utilize in your GA4 reports UI. And then for additional parameters and metrics that go beyond this limit, you can utilize Google BigQuery. So within a GA4, a Google BigQuery data export, you can access, analyze the complete event data set without those limitations. To address data sampling, you can use exploration reports and select and in exploration report, there is an option for you to select more detailed results. So technically, it will generate a report and try to kind of unsample the data in the UI itself. Or you can also request an unsample results. And exploration reports, it takes some time for them to get generated, but then they are accessible in your exploration reports UI as a separate tab. Additionally, as our usual recommendation, we also recommend to leverage Google BigQuery data because it has unsampled data. For cardinality, we usually recommend the clients to exercise the caution with custom dimensions of high cardinality, as they can impact the report performance. For example, if you have a customer like user IDs, we usually don't recommend to create a custom definition for the user ID or a customer ID in the GA4 until it's really necessary, because due to this high cardinality that we foresee might impact the reports. However, there is also another way how you can expand your data that is nested under or condensed under the other row. It's by using expanded data sets, which is exclusive to the GA4 360 properties. So you can expand the data in the exploration reports, and including also in GA4 UI reports up to 200 million rows of data. Additionally, very interesting is that you can also query the expanded data sets through the GA4 UI and a Looker Studio. So they also will be available for other tools too. So thresholding, it's a tricky one. Usually it's not possible to remove the thresholding. However, you can still adjust the reported identity settings in your GA4 property configurations and set it to device-based only. And so we have, as you remember, we have blended reporting identity. Usually it's the one that would have a Google Signals enabled, which could cause this thresholding. So our main recommendation is to, if you really want to see the data without thresholding, is switching over to device-based reporting identity. And this reporting identity was use only device ID or app instance ID for apps, bypassing this data threshold. Alternatively, again, integrate Google BigQuery with GA4 will allow you to view your data threshold free. When it comes to GA4 UI reports challenges that I mentioned, our main recommendation is use the exploration report. But however, because the exploration reports, once you start using the exploration report, you might see also that there is some differences between the data in UI and GA4. And we just wanted to kind of highlight it that it is by design, because both UI and exploration reports will give you the views of data at a different level of granularity, and there's also significant differences in there, for example, in the processing time between two reports, which could lead to the differences in data, as well as if you, for example, using the segments in the exploration report, they're not the same as comparisons in the GA4, and unfortunately, the comparisons in GA4 are not really comparisons of segments are not very available in the GA4 UI reports. And also, like when you are using a date range in explorations, those can be also limited to your properties data retention settings. So if you, for example, set it up to 14 months, you might see in exploration reports less data than you would expect to see in UI. Then for data retention limitations, because we just mentioned them, our main recommendation would be probably utilize a Looker Studio, GA4 API, or BigQuery, as those are not a subject of the standard data retention settings of the GA4 property. 500 row table limit in exploration reports. Also, it might be a very inconvenient just to view the first 500 rows on the table from exploration. You can still bypass it. To do that, you can view first initial 500 rows of data or export it from your exploration report into your preferred format, let's say Google Sheets. And then you can adjust the report settings to begin displaying data from row, let's 501, right? And onwards. So you can change the settings in the starts row field of your settings of the exploration reports. And you can get more rows either within the UI, or if you are exporting data on something like in a Google spreadsheet, in a CSV, then you can keep on downloading, this data in a different data sources for export. The only thing that we wanted to note that if you're exporting the data and not using exploration reports UI, you need to keep in mind there is also a limit export up to 500 rows of data. So probably UI, like using UI would be more safe way of looking into the data from exploration. But if you really need to download the data, keep in mind about that export limit. Now that we've explored strategies to address various cautions and challenges in GA4 reporting, let's turn our attention on how GA4's UI can be leveraged to tackle some of these complexities. I'll now hand it over to Jared. So he will guide us through the using GA4 API, its benefits, and important considerations. So the floor is yours, Jared.
Thank you, Vika. I appreciate it. And at this time, we will also launch our first poll. The question is, which GA4 data analysis capability do you currently use today? You can select all that apply. We have a few listed out there for y'all to select. And yeah, select all that apply. And as that's continue to roll, I'm actually going to jump right into the GA4 Data API, some of the overview, the extraction methods, benefits, limitations, and then also connectors that are available for the GA4 Data API. So some of the benefits, or just a high-level overview, sorry. The GA4 Data API is a REST API that Google provides to extract your GA4 data. It enables users to access and programmatically get data out of GA4, reporting data out of GA4, so it more closely aligns to the GA4 UI. This is also without the need of additional data transformation, so it's a very much so plug and play kind of system, and it is widely used across the industry. It's something that we see a majority of clients leveraging whenever they are actually building. There are many tools and products that are available to users. This is the reason why it's so widely used and widely adopted. There might be some that you don't even realize that actually leverage the GA4 Data API, but I'll kind of mention that there's really three ways to get data out of GA4. The first one is file download. That's the one that I was kind of excluding. No one really downloads files very often, but you can, like Vika was saying in the exploration report section. But then the other two way are via the GA4 Data API and then BigQuery. And the BigQuery export is exclusive to BigQuery. No other product or service can actually touch that one. So majority of your tools that are out there actually leverage the GA4 Data API to actually extract that data so that you can actually build reports on it or store it or anything along those lines. That is if you're not using BigQuery. The other benefit or overview is that the GA4 Data API does also offer additional parameters in addition to what you get in GA4. We'll dive into a little bit of what that looks like whenever we hit the benefits section, but there are some additional parameters that are available. There's also some parameters that are not available, which is one of the issues that we have, or metrics as well. So we'll talk through those as we kind of go through here. The first is the extraction method. So we want to jump into kind of dive into understanding what kind of extractions can take place within the GA4 API. So if you're leveraging it, what can you utilize? The first method that you're going to see here is core reports. This is actually pulling data out of your core reports that you expect in your GA4 UI is kind of the way to think about it. So any kind of data points that would be available in the core reporting of GA4 is able to be accessed through the API through leveraging this specific method. And I'll mention that about 95 to, I would even say 98% of reporting and dashboarding capabilities leverage the core reports. So this method is really heavily utilized, and majority of people leverage this knowing that they're leveraging it or not. The next one is real time. There is a capability to actually export real-time data. This is going to essentially take data from present time to 30 minutes ago, so data that's collected up to 30 minutes ago, and provide you a way to actually access that through the API. So if you want to build a real-time report or things along those lines, you can go ahead and leverage this. Majority of products out there typically don't leverage real-time APIs. It's something that's more customized or built. There might be some paid products out there that do enable that. There's also funnel. Funnel is another method that enables users to leverage the API or leverage building funnel style metrics. Best way to think about the funnel method is to kind of think about the funnel that's available within your explore reports in GA4. So if you've seen a funnel exploration within GA4, some of those same metrics are available through there. So abandonment rate, completion rate, things like that, once you set up the actual steps that are needed to create that funnel. So we've seen individuals leverage funnel. It's very rare. Typically they leverage a core report and then they within like a dashboarding tool, and they start filtering out data and then creating their funnel based on their core report data rather than the funnel route. And then the last one is audience export. So if you're looking to get a list of users who are in an audience at one particular time, you can go ahead and utilize the GA4 reporting, data API to actually pull in those audiences. The big note here is that this is something that the list will continue to change. So as you pull the data again further down the road or tomorrow or whatever it might be, due to those audience limits, whether it's new users joining or old IDs being forgone or removed based on your audience settings that you have, the audiences will vary depending on what day you're looking at those. So some of the other benefits. So I know I mentioned increased data fields. So there are an increased number of data fields that are available in the GA4 Data API. There's a few places you can actually view this. One of the references here is this GA4 Data Spy. It provides a very nice thing. If you look up what kind of parameter you might be interested in or metric, you can actually select it and it will populate. This is available in BigQuery. This is available in Looker Studio. This is available in the API. This is available in the GA4 reporting. It's a very useful tool. We leverage it here at InfoTrust whenever we're interested if new things have been released or anything along those lines. You can also leverage Google's dev documentations relating to the GA4 Data API. Those are totally available as well. But some of just examples that are available within the the data API that are not available, for example, in the UI, are going to be individual key event rates. So if you're looking for a key event rates for an individual key event, you can actually leverage that. There's a way to get to it through the GA4 UI, but it's not very easy, especially whenever you're interested in session, first user, and you want to see that across the table, across all of your different reports. It's very easy to pull in that kind of a metric into a dashboard that you're creating. Next benefit, linking is about linking GA4 data sources. So it's very easy to integrate if you're using something like Looker Studio. That's something that is also fully capable and is easy to link. So if you've used Looker Studio before, it's a very quick connection to GA4, fairly seamless as long as you have the permissions necessary, and is easy and quick to link. That is similar to any of your other reporting tools. You could think Power BI has a way to access it, Tableau, all of those things. You need the right permissions to do so, but once it's there, the steps are fairly quick and they're typically fairly automated in a sense, in terms of just being able to like walk through this step, let me access your Google account, and let's link it that way. So fairly straightforward whenever we're thinking about that. There's also a way to add comparisons. So this is something that's relatively new in the API. So you can actually import saved comparisons from GA4 via the GA4 Data API. So this is something that's relatively newly added whenever saved comparisons came out. If you're not aware, saved comparisons came out about a month, 2 months, 3 months ago, somewhere in there. I don't have it right off the top of my head. But it's something that's relatively new. And whenever they came out with those saved comparisons, they equally came out with a way to actually access those. And so that's something that is available. I'll talk a little bit about this last comment here, where comparisons are less flexible than segments, which we are hoping that there's a segment option that is added to the GA4 Data API. Next is data availability. Within your GA4 data processing limits do apply. So all of those things that Vika ran through, thresholding, character limits, event limits, things like that, because all of the data is getting pulled out of GA4, those same limits apply. The one limit that doesn't apply, that I will mention there, is actually, or sorry, that's actually next slide I'm thinking about. This one is actually about the data that is available is fairly quick and easy to access. So you do have the availability to very quickly access, pull data, update it, change it, reconfigure it, everything along those lines. And I'll talk about what I was just mentioning there on the next slide, actually. So we'll jump into some of the limitations. So field availability, you see that pop up again. There are some fields that are available exclusively within the GA4 UI currently. One of those is your entrances and exits. Metrics are only available in your Explore reports. That's something that isn't being pulled out into things like Looker Studio or some of your other dashboarding capabilities. It is subject to quota limits and token limits. So this is something that I really want to hit on is if you are connecting via the GA4 Data API, this is something that applies no matter what. So if you are a very, very large client trying to pull a large amount of data points out of your GA4 collection processing, you can run into token and quota limits. Each kind of user or each kind of licensee has different limits. So for example, standard license users have limits that are way less than what you would have as a 360 license. It's actually 10 times less to be exact on all points in there. And you can reference this document there to access specifically the quotas that might apply to you. Next one is unavailability of segments. So I kind of touched on this. You really can't import segments from GA4 via the data GA4 Data API. That's one thing that we're hoping will become available at some point in the future. The reason for that is comparisons is fairly limited. If you've used that feature, it's fairly limited in how you can filter, what you can add, things along those lines, sequencing of steps, anything like that. you really don't have a very easy way to access that within comparisons, and segments does provide that. And then what I kind of was mentioning there earlier, data processing limitations. So there are some limitations on what the API can pull. So for example, it doesn't bypass all of your GA4 standard limits, cardinality, character limits, thresholding, things like that. The one that it does help with is data retention. So you can actually access the GA4 Data API and pull based on a larger retention rate. And then the final thing that I wanted to touch on is connectors. So there are some various connectors that are available. One is Google Sheets. There might be some who are unaware of this, but Google does have a pre-built extension that is available via Google Sheets. It is free, but it does require more of a manual process. You can schedule reports to run at specific times, but it is a little bit more manual in terms of how you're setting up and ways that you're pulling it. There's also Looker Studio, which I know a majority of GA4 users leverage. This is going to leverage, you know, the GA4 Data API and pull in for, you know, visualization within GA4. There are both free and paid versions of Looker Studio, and it also allows users to actually combine data from other data sources as well, which can be really, really beneficial and helpful. The data pulls are kind of more automatic. So as you adjust your, you know, date range filters or specific dimensions you want to filter on, it will adjust for you automatically throughout the table if you set it up that way. There are also third parties. So this is something I kind of referenced. A lot of people aren't aware that third parties use the GA4 Data API. So even though they may promise things like, we're able to do this, we're able to do that, we're able to do all these other things, no one else offers that. Technically, they all have access to the exact same data. So whenever you're thinking about funnel.io, Fivetran, Supermetrics, all of them are still using the GA4 Data API. What they do with that data after, that might be where they're actually providing the value or being able to connect to multiple different products and things like that. But they all start with the same baseline, which is what's available in the GA4 Data API. But these cool tools can be really helpful, especially whenever you might be linking to a non-Google product, or if you're wanting to link to, you know, directly to maybe AWS storage location or things like that. They are paid typically. There might be some free ones out there. I'd kind of be hesitant to leverage free ones if or expect that there's going to be many issues. The data pulls can be automated through processes as well, which is kind of beneficial. Last one is build your own. If you're not aware, you can actually build your own. The one thing to note is that you would need to add some cloud functions to actually pull in that data. That's the reason I say it's free-ish. Cloud functions typically have some sort of small cost that might be associated to it, but definitely available there.
So now I'll go to the last leg of our comparison in some sense, understand the BQ integration. I'll talk about the benefits, comparison between UI and BigQuery, use cases, some considerations, and then exporting options. Next slide. So if you think of BigQuery, it's an extremely powerful tool because you have all the increased flexibility while analyzing the data. You don't have to care about the limitations of the UI and API here. You're getting all the raw data log-based in the sense event by event, and you get a glimpse of all the individual touch points of each users with all the granularity that you want. So some benefits that I can really think of is you don't get any sampling, you don't have any cardinality, you don't have any others rows in the report. You don't have to care about the data retention limits. As soon as you link your GA4 to BigQuery, the data starts coming in and you own that data at that point of time. So as soon as you link the data, whatever data you get through that linkage is you own, and you can kind of query like 2 years back, 3 years back, whatever you want to query on. One very important benefit is there are no limits on custom parameters. So if, for example, you have a bunch of parameters on the UI, you want some additional more, but don't want to have it in the UI, but do your further analysis on the BQN, you can just, implement that on the data layer end, and then you don't register that. parameter on the UI, but it will still come in and it will populate in the BigQuery export. So in that way, you don't have any limit here in the sense of how many parameters you want to implement on your end. There is a bit of caution though. So when you have the consent mode implemented, and especially if you're using the reporting identity as blended, there is a modeling happening on the unconsented data on the UI, but that data is not carry forwarded into the BigQuery. It just has the collected data. So for example, the user pseudo ID, the session ID, all of those get null, but you have all the other information coming in through in the sense what event parameters are registered, what user parameters were there, and etc. You don't have the Google signals exported, that is proprietary to GA4 UI. The data is updated up to 72 hours for the daily tables. So the initial load of the data will be done the day after, but if you have measurement protocol implemented or if you have data import implemented, it might take certain more time to get in that data from those different sources and then update it into BigQuery. So as like you'll have all the data like within the next day, but in the back end, it will keep on updating and appending rows as per your implementation. Another key point to be cautious about is the traffic attribution. Right now in BigQuery, you have traffic source on the user level, which is on the very first visit, or it has event level, which is like when you're going through the events, and then it's just collecting in the source and medium information about that. It does not have any traffic attribution on the session level. But having said that, you can build that on BigQuery by doing your own attribution model using your SQL skills. So in here, when we try to compare the GA4 UI and BQ, the first thing that we'll notice is that there might be differences in the numbers that you are reporting on different reports. The standard reporting surfaces, that is the UI, is aimed to provide the maximum values to GA users at the lowest friction. So if you have modeling data, if you have measurement protocol, and if you have all these different value additions that you can see, it's provided by Google for you to analyze and then see the data on your UI. But if you want to supplement this value additions, if you want to have something completely customized, you can switch over to BQ to do that kind of analysis. So you might see that when there is all the data in the BigQuery, it's all collected data, as in whatever is visible on the data layer is what you get on the BigQuery export. So for a large number of users, there might be differences between the numbers that you see on UI versus what you see on BigQuery, but they aren't expected to be reconcilable just because of the nature of the exports that we have between these two platforms. And I've included a link down below too for a blog article reference by Google, which actually goes in much detail about what those differences are, what those value additions are. And then you can see point by point exactly where you can see the differences. Next slide, please. So in terms of use cases, what you can think of in the very first place is a marketing warehouse. If you have GA4 connected to your BigQuery, you can integrate your raw data with the first-party data sources for the very first step. And then if you feel like you have additional platforms in there, there are data transfer services available for you to do a very quick linkages between Facebook, Google Ads, Salesforce, DV360, SA360. You just have to mention some details in there, and the data pipeline is automatically set up by the data transfer services there. If you have something really customized, then you can use third-party tools like Klaviyo. You want to integrate Bing, you can definitely do it via other components of GCP. When you get all of this data in one place, you can do advanced analysis on top of it. So if you're thinking about propensity modeling, or if you're thinking about VBB, if you're thinking about building your own custom attribution model, or creating certain advanced audiences and segmentation, this is the place to go for. And at the end, definitely about visualization all the data that you have. So for example, the platforms like Looker Studio, Power BI, Tableau, you can connect it seamlessly. The important thing to note here is there are no scope mixing issues. So if you want to visualize your item level data with event level or session level, you can do all of that with the SQL on the BigQuery. You can pull as much historical data as you need because now you own that data, and you can apply the custom segments that you have on this data that you have. Now, while you use BigQuery, there are some considerations. So the integration that is available is natively free, but there is a cost associated with the storage and processing. So if you look at storage, if you're actively using the data, there is one cost applied to your data, versus if you're using your data, you haven't touched your data for a long time, like more than 90 days, then the cost drops to 50%. There is cost associated with the queries. By default, there is on-demand mode applied on your query processing, but if you feel like your team is using a lot of data and you want to have a fixed, flat rate, then that is an option that's available. There's more information on how you can estimate the data as well. So I've included a link here down below that will, just give you a rough estimate of how the data will look like. You can input your own data storage cost and then query there, and then you'll get to see what the cost associated there is. There's also consideration in terms of how you are going to be able to export the table depending on the license type. So if you are a standard customer, then you do have a limit of daily event export of 1 million events per day. So you can leverage the data streams filtering and the event filtering to maintain this limit. But if you're on the 360 end, then there is no limit at all. You can just keep on adding your data on the data layer, and it will export everything to BigQuery. Next slide, please. So in terms of exporting options, we do have a lot of options in terms of what types of export we want to have. Majority of our customers try to use the daily complete export, which is a raw unsampled GA4 event export from the previous day. And as I mentioned, it will take up to 72 hours for it to fully update the data. And it will look like events table. So this is how it will look like on the UI. But the second most used export type is real time. So this does not have any export limit, but it will try to take in data as it occurs within a few minutes. One caveat, though, there is no traffic source data included in this export. You do have to upgrade from Sandbox version 2 if you're using that for BigQuery. Then another one to really consider is the fresh daily export. This is an export which will just look like your daily export, but it will have an SLA. That SLA information is coming soon. So that will guarantee that your data is loaded by the same time each day. So this will look like events _ fresh _ the time that you have. That's how it will look like in your BigQuery interface. But stay tuned for the SLA information. The fourth export that we have is the user export, and this is a very interesting one. It creates two tables for you. One is for the users that have accepted and consented to your website, and the other one is pseudonymous users. What it has is it will have all the audience data, the predictive data, each row for every user, so you can see what individual users are doing on your website and all the information regarding that users. So this is a very useful export if you want to leverage the user information and understand the audience data and export the predictive audiences that you have implemented on the UI side and get all the export in BigQuery. So these are all the export types that are available. All right, so we will go through recommendations in terms of what we can do for all the various platforms that we have available. I will pass it on to Jared for this one.
Awesome. Thank you, Trish. Appreciate it. So just as a quick note, I know we're kind of crunched for time. So as people drop off, if you posted any questions, we'll make sure that we send them out to y'all in the chat if we aren't able to get to those. So just as a note, but we do have some resources after this as well. So without wasting any time, ease versus accuracy. This is more so if your organization is trying to determine what route to go and you're looking for something that's a little bit easier, it provides data accessibility more quickly versus data accuracy, something that your organization is able to control a little bit easier in terms of definitions and things like that. We kind of have this chart of what we would view as you can kind of think of time going this way still as well, but then also data accessibility versus data accuracy. So depending on your understanding, your experience, what resources are available to your organization. GA4 user interface, that's going to be the easiest and quickest one. Provides an ease of access and flexibility. Most of your standard users are going to be able to leverage it fairly quickly. Also best to leverage if you just have a one-off question. So you just have a random question that came up and you want to go validate. Typically best to at least start with the user interface to see if that's going to provide a solution. If you have more of your standard reports, reports that are maybe used for dashboarding, ones that you refer to weekly or daily or even monthly, quarterly, that's where you're going to want to start leveraging the GA4 Data API, especially if the data that you're pulling is not very complex or large amounts of data. So the Data API will enable that because it provides a little bit more reusable reports in a quick way to set up and access. You can also, utilize it to combine data as well. So if you have small needs to combine data from other data sources, you can quickly do that through blending the reports or things along those lines that are available in some of the dashboarding. It might be different depending on dashboarding, but specifically talking maybe about Looker Studio, you can do that fairly quickly there. And then lastly, BigQuery. This is going to be best if you're very large, complex organization that has a lot of complex data pulls. Maybe you have an issue with cardinality in other rows. If you do have issues with that, it's going to be passed on to your dashboarding tool through the API, or you're going to run out of your tokens because that will also affect token usage if you're doing a lot of filtering on top. And so BigQuery is the way to kind of get around that. Also provides users with the ability to outline and actually determine their own logic. So that's the reason we put it a little bit closer to this data accuracy. So because you can determine what you want it to look like, what combinations, what logic you're using to actually combine. You can very quickly explain that to anyone who might ask, or I won't say quickly explain it, but you'll be able to at least explain it rather than be like, it's Google, it's a black box, we're unsure. And so with that, I'm actually going to pass it back over to Trish to run through some BigQuery use cases.
Yeah, so when it comes to reporting, we can take an example here of campaign performance reporting. So there are various factors that goes into deciding which platforms to use. So at a very broad outlook, we can divide it into like two factors, whether you have technical expertise on your end or not. Because if you use UI and API, it's very easy to plug in the data and use it in your visualization tools. But if you want to use BigQuery, then you need to have someone on your end who is comfortable with SQL and understands the GA4 schema as well. And in terms of maturity as well, whether you're nascent, you're just trying out different reports on your end, or if you really want to build your own custom attribution model, or you want to have your advanced analysis on, then that's where you want to understand which platforms to use. The other way to look for is if you want to closely align your numbers with GA4 UI reporting or not. So first I'll go to the top hierarchy here, which is expertise and maturity. So if you're in somewhere between the nascent and intermediate, First, you can try to explore the GA4 UI and see if you're able to get all the needs on the reporting side from there or not. But if you feel like we'll need to move to a visualization tool and use that data in there, then you can move to the next stage, which is using the GA4 Data API. In there, you'll kind of do all the high-level reporting, understand the dimensions and matrix that you want to use. But then there are certain, token limits, as Jared and Vika mentioned, and then also like certain scope mixing issues or not able to like take in the segments. That's when you can move to BigQuery and then get that data in there. For campaign performance specifically, we have to build out the session level traffic attribution model. But if you want a certain different attribution model to be applied other than the last non-direct click, then you can implement that in the BigQuery too. If you're intermediate or advanced, you can try to pull the data from the data API into the BigQuery. And the reason why we are suggesting that is that because you might get exhausted with the token limits, or you do have certain limitations from using the native connector that's available. So you can pull all of that into your data warehouse, into BigQuery, and then get your reporting on top of that. The BigQuery, if you want to move on to the customization, then you can move to the BigQuery for in-depth analysis. The second hierarchy is if you want to closely align with the GA4 UI reporting, and if you want to have it closely aligning with the attribution model that you have in the UI, you can use directly the API connector tool into dashboarding tool, or you can pull that data from the API into the BigQuery. But if you want to have pinpoint accuracy, you want to know exactly what goes into my attribution model, then the BigQuery is the way to go. I will pass it on to Vika for talking more about the GA4 Data API into the BigQuery part.
Yeah, thank you so much. Next slide. We do have a very short time, so I will try to kind of provide you an overview. When are there instances where you're going to be interested in using GA4 API to Google BigQuery solution? So one of the instances would be if you want to report on a channel grouping. So API is storing the data about the channel groups, which is opposed to the Google BigQuery. Google BigQuery never had a channel grouping data, neither for GA4 nor for Universal Analytics. So there's one of the instances where probably using API to BigQ connection will be very beneficial. Another use case would probably be the instances when you want to backfill the data in the Google BigQuery. And this could happen in instances when, for example, the integration of GA4 with a BigQuery happened a bit later, and you see some historical data gaps. So you technically can pull up the historical data from the API, save it, export it to the Google BigQuery as a tables, and then obviously you would need to pre-aggregate the Google BigQuery tables to be ready used with the different other dashboards, like Looker Studio or any other Power BI. But you can definitely use this kind of integration in the scenarios that I just outlined. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, so I'll pass it on to Jared back.
I'll also run through resources. So we do have a Cookieless Summit that's coming up. If you're interested in registering, this is in New York. Feel free to select this link that will be out to y'all. Also, we have a resource library. There's lots of documents. There's actually 2 that are specifically comparing GA4 API versus BigQuery that are out there. If you search that, you can find more resources, very good documentations out there. And then also Q&A. I know there are 2 questions in there. Is there any cost associated with the API usage? No, unless you use the cloud function or one of the paid versions. I don't know if we kind of ran through that slide, but generally no, not for just leveraging it. But if you're using your own, build your own, there would be very, very, very minor costs using that cloud function. And then lastly, can we use the data API to pull older data? Technically, yes. That is available, and you can do so. That's kind of how we did a lot of UA data. If there's any other Q&As, feel free to reach out. The last thing that I'll mention, current clients, you can feel free to reach out to your InfoTrust project teams and request a workshop. If you want to talk more about this, we're more than happy to hop on a discussion about that. And future clients, if you're someone that's out there that found this and you're interested to learn more, feel free to reach out and contact InfoTrust. But we appreciate y'all's time and hope that y'all have a good rest of your day.